Okay, guys. Last time we did a reading on the causes of imperialism. So we're going to go into imperialism and how it dovetailed into America getting a colonial empire. So you should have this PowerPoint. It states that imperialism is a policy of a nation that extends its power and domination over several nations, either directly or used by force or indirectly through influence. So I'm going to go back. You don't have this PowerPoint, but I'm going to talk about how America became a colonial power. What were the 5 causes? How did the U.S. become a colonial power? Why did we join this imperialistic club of other European nations? So first reason, we know commercial business interests. They were looking for places to sell their goods, to invest in capital, to invest in new resources. And this is going to lead to a dramatic increase in their profits. We see that commercial interest is going to increase our imports and exports, which will lead to a growing economy, a growing gross domestic product. The second reason, we saw that we got involved in foreign and quest to take over foreign areas was military reasons. We desired to get to China, and in a way to get to China, we had to have coaling and refueling stations. And so these are why some of these islands that y'all did on your map were very significant. Hawaii, Midway, they were going to be coaling and refueling stations. We also talk about social Darwinism that we saw in the Gilded Age. It's going to come in here to talk about the social hierarchy and us trying to go in, and because we were a better race and some races were degenerate, this is why we're able to take them over. The other one that we see is white man's burden, that it is our duty, that we have been quested by God to go and save these backwards heathen people. We also have missionaries who want to go out into areas and bring Christianity. So these are people going into China. And if y'all notice that haircut, that's the Manchu haircut that y'all probably seen in world history. Okay, this is just a political cartoon of Americans going out into China, and this is going to eventually lead to the Boxer Rebellion. Also, the closing of the frontier, many people feared that we had nowhere else to spread democracy. We had exhausted all our resources, and this was reasons why that we needed to go into other areas. So now I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint you have. And we talked about imperialism, but our territorial growth in imperialism is going to be very different from what we see on this map. The territorial growth that we had on the continental U.S. was every territory we added, we made them states. When we look out in imperialism, every single place that we're going to go to not necessarily is going to become a state. Yes, it could be a territory or a place that we may have influence in, but it's not going to become a state. So our imperialistic presidents are also our progressive presidents, Roosevelt, Taft, and Wilson. And we just have a map on here to talk about all the areas we'll go in imperialism. So this is a political cartoon. As you can probably see, Uncle Sam is right in the middle of this, and Uncle Sam doesn't look like your typical Uncle Sam. Uncle Sam has gotten very big. So I want us to look at different parts of this. We're going to first focus on the middle part of this political cartoon. If you notice, Uncle Sam is at a tailor shop. If you notice his pants, if you see those pinstripes, do y'all see the pinstripes? It says Texas, Louisiana, Alaska, Florida, California, Hawaii, Puerto Rico. Those are all places, most of those places we claim, California, Florida, Alaska, Louisiana, purchased Texas, they came part of the United States as territories and eventually states. But as you can see by the back end of his pants, we're adding in places that are no longer going to be states. They're going to be territories. So this is just symbolic of our empire getting bigger. And if you look at this guy right here, this is William McKinley. William McKinley will always be characterized by like these caterpillar eyebrows. And if you look at him, he's sizing up for new clothes. So this is significant that he really wants territorial expansion. If he didn't want territorial expansion, he'd be putting on a treadmill or something. And looking over here, McKinley is justifying why we should expand. He says rational expansion. We're enlightened. So we see the white man's burden. We see the social Darwinism. Okay, so we know McKinley's pro-imperialism, pro-Uncle Sam becoming bigger. But if we look at these people over here on this side that look like they're out of Sweeney Todd or something, they're trying to give Uncle Sam, if you look at that, they have vials and a spoon, right? They're giving him, and if you look at what it says right there, it's anti-expansionist policy. So this political cartoon shows us both sides of the debate at this time. People who are pro-imperialistic, like McKinley, and there's going to be a group of people who are anti-imperialist. I don't know if you know these people, Carnegie, William Jennings Bryan, and I don't know, some disheveled dude over here. Okay, so a long time ago, under the Monroe administration, we saw this document called the Monroe Doctrine. It wasn't created by Monroe, however, it was done by his Secretary of State, John Quincy Adams. And we're going to see the U.S. will develop a foreign policy that stated European nations needed to stay out of the Western Hemisphere. Hunting season was over. There's nowhere else to hunt. There's nowhere else to take over. And eventually, when we get to imperialism, we're going to look back at this doctrine and bring it back up as a justification of why we should get involved in the Western Hemisphere. Alfred Thayer Mahan is going to use this along with kind of influencing the United States that if we're going to really enforce the Monroe Doctrine, we need to build up our Navy. And it's going to use the English as a reason. You know, they had a powerful navy. They were able to expand worldwide. So the Monroe Doctrine will be the justification for empire building. Our first use of the Monroe Doctrine actually deals with a border dispute in Venezuela. Y'all had to do on your map. Y'all had to find Venezuela, and then you had to find this itty-bitty place called British Guiana. And what is occurring here is the British are actually taking over parts of Venezuela that great resources have been found. And so if you look at the political cartoon over here, the British are overexerting their power, and the United States is going to come in and stop the line from being overexerted. And we're going to see England is finally going to agree to arbitration because they have other issues going on in Europe. And this is the first time that we'll see that the U.S. is taking an active role in the Western Hemisphere using the Monroe Doctrine. Another way we use the Monroe Doctrine actually stems from Americans already being in Hawaii. We see that missionaries have gone to Hawaii, they settled there. Americans have gone out there because they realize Hawaii is a great place for sugar plantations and other tropical fruits. And at this time, the U.S. has received from the Hawaiian government the right to use Pearl Harbor. Before the McKinley Tariff was passed, many Americans had power in Hawaii. They actually had treaties that did not have tariffs that applied to them. But after the McKinley Tariff is passed, that tariff is going to make American goods that are made in Hawaii more expensive because they're made in a foreign nation. So many Americans get upset and they seek political power in Hawaii. And amidst all of this, because they're upset about the tariffs, they're going to basically force themselves into power. And they're going to get control of the Hawaiian government and force Queen Liliuokalani out of power. The American businessmen or American planters there who are upset by these tariffs are aided by the Marines to overthrow Queen Liliuokalani. And so they seek annexation at this time because if they become a state, they do not have to pay the tariff. Cleveland at this time says no because it was dishonorable the way we took over Hawaii. So Hawaii will become a republic, and it becomes a republic, and I don't know if y'all know a guy named Sanford Dole. He becomes their first president. And if you've ever been to Hawaii, he has a huge plantation, the Dole Plantation. And we see they will become their own republic. It has the same history as Texas because Texas tried to get annexation under the Jackson era, but there was an issue of slavery and it was dishonorable. It would have divided up our nation, so Texas becomes a republic. And then eventually Texas is brought in under Tyler. Texas will be brought in by joint resolution by McKinley. and we're going to see its annex as a territory, and officially it'll become a state by the 1950s. Okay, so now we're going to move on to what caused the Spanish-American War, and we see this in the reading that we did on Monday and Tuesday. One of the first things is that we really felt sympathetic to the Cubans. We had this commonality with them that we sympathized because they were facing oppression by a cruel motherland. We're seeing Spain had come in and put a lot of rebels in these butcher-wiler camps. And I don't know if you could see this bottom image right there, what's going on, but let me blow it up in there. Do y'all see the two soldiers right there? Do y'all see what they're sitting on? They're sitting on carcasses. So this is what has happened to the rebels. In these butcher-wiler camps, a lot of our Cubans have been starved to death. So I don't have this image in this PowerPoint, but I have it in a different PowerPoint. They've been starved to death. So y'all don't have this PowerPoint. Oh, this is Sanford Dole. He has a really cool beard. I'll eventually talk about this stuff later. These are images that are actually put in our newspapers at this time to talk about the Weiler camps and the starvation that is going on. I am sorry, guys, but I have to appeal to why we have sympathy for them. And so these images go out in our newspapers. People start to feel the sympathy that we need to go in and at least do something to help the Cubans against the being oppressed by the Spanish. And many Americans look at Cuba. It's 90 miles south of the United States. We also have many businessmen who've invested there. They invested in the sugar plantations, and they invested in property and banks and railroads. And if there is a revolution going on, we see that the rebels are actually burning things. And many businessmen are asking the U.S. to go in to secure their investments. The next issue is the U.S. government is going to go in, and we sent a battleship, the USS Maine. It was sent out there just to go on a courtesy call to make sure that Americans were being protected. We're kind of trying to put pressure on the Spanish, and in its way to Havana, it exploded. The newspapers get a hold of the story, and they actually say, was it a bomb? Was it the Spanish? And the newspapers began to rile up Americans. Remember the Maine, to hell with Spain. And so here's it's not an actual photo, but this is Pulitzer saying that, he's telling Remington, go out there and make the pictures that will suffice to encourage the Americans to go to war. And so here is a newspaper from the time, the Maine explosion caused by a bomb or a torpedo. Again, they're alluding to the Americans that possibly the Spanish did this. And we saw this in the reading that this is going to lead to Americans wanting to go to war. Any time in history that our boats are exploded, we are going to go to war. World War I, World War II, Vietnam, the War of 1812. The other thing that we're kind of alluding to with the Maine was the newspapers. They actually sensationalized the news. Sensationalize the news means that they were telling like half-truths. They were twisting the stuff to get sales. And so William Hearst and Joseph Pulitzer, you probably know Pulitzer from the Pulitzer Prize, kind of encourage people to go out and get this stuff, furnish the pictures to get the war. And the result is this American jingoism. And jingoism means extreme pride, that you don't want your nation hurt. So the yellow journalists are going to rile up the public to go out into this war. The next thing that the yellow press gets a hold of is this Delome letter. The Delome letter was from the Spanish minister to the U.S., and it insulted President McKinley. They called him an ear-to-the-ground president. And this is a really big insult. An ear-to-the-ground president means that you're hearing for what the rumblings of what the people want. You don't have a backbone, and you're basically listening to what the people want. This is an insult. At this time, you don't insult presidents. I know we see insults go daily out there, but insulting a president is dishonorable at this time. This caused hysteria, many Americans saying that we need to defend our nation. And so the press go at it. We have more political cartoons. If you see what's going on here, there's anarchy. Do y'all see it in the Butcher Wilder camps we have right there? We see Lady Cuba having Spanish misrule, and this is going to encourage the Americans that we should get involved. And so McKinley, he basically asked Spain to stop. He says, stop what is going on in Cuba and give them their independence. Spain did not comply. Cuba is a very rich sugar island for them. And so under pressure from the public, again riled up by the newspapers, we're going to see he asked Congress for a declaration of war. And on April 11th, the war declaration is done. And the U.S. agreed to help Cuba militarily, and are not going to take them over. And we tell them this in the Teller Amendment, saying, look, we're out there to help you, nothing more than that, and we will give you your independence. So this is like a happy little thing. That's why I have the little happy face. We're ensuring their freedom. So the U.S. decides to take this war on a two-pronged invasion. Theodore Roosevelt realizes war breaks out. He gets on the phone. He's the Secretary of the Navy saying, hey, he calls up Commodore Dewey saying, hey, war is broken out. Send out your troops from Hong Kong to the Philippines so we can have a two-pronged war. He does that. He leaves his post, and we see that he becomes part of our Rough Riders. Dewey will meet up with another guy in the Philippines, Emilio Aguinaldo, and they're going to fight the Spanish there. And we are going to see that the Treaty of Paris will be signed the day before the Philippines is actually acquired. Like, they actually finish the war there. And we'll talk more about that when I get to the treaty. So the war in the Caribbean, again, this is a one-year war. In Puerto Rico, the troops are welcome. In Cuba, the most pivotal battle is the Battle of San Juan Hill. Theodore Roosevelt and his Rough Riders defeat Spanish troops, and I'm going to blow up this picture that's right there. They're called the Rough Riders, right? But looking at this image, they're missing something. They're missing their horses. And one of the reasons why they're missing their horses is because when the U.S. government and military were getting soldiers ready, the last time that they actually had a war was the Civil War, 1865. There hadn't been much soldiers involvement except out west. And so when these guys were getting on the ship, the U.S. military out of Florida forgot to put the horses. So these Rough Riders are not riding their horses at this extent. Okay, so Battle of San Juan Hill, that's Roosevelt and his Rough Riders. And then we see the Battle of Santiago as the U.S. Navy destroys the Spanish Navy in the Caribbean. I also want to reflect on this picture. We know that they forgot the horses, but I want you to look at this image, and I want us to look at why our military is not prepared. They're in Cuba at this time, but if you could tell, they're wearing winter fatigues. They have long sleeves, they have long pants, and so there's thermals that are given for underwear. These guys, yes, they're standing for a picture, an appropriate picture, but most of the time they're not going to be wearing these winter fatigues. And so what we see in this war, more men will die from mosquito bites than from bullets. And this is going to be a big signal to our U.S. military that we need to get better prepared if we're going to be an imperialistic nation. So the Treaty of Paris, again, fighting still going on in the Philippines. Fighting has ended in Cuba. So in the Treaty of Paris, Spain grants independence to Cuba. The U.S. is given Puerto Rico and Guam, which are two Spanish territories, which we've already ended the war there. We have to pay $20 million for the Philippines because the war is not done there. The Treaty of Paris is a turning point for the United States at this time. Prior to this, we had no colonial territories. This treaty makes the U.S. a colonial power. Cuba, really at this point, it's independent according to the Treaty of Paris, but the U.S. is very fearful to let it go because it's a new nation. It could be taken over back by the Spanish. The Germans could come in. The French could come in. And so the U.S. at this time realized all the travesties from the war and wanted to improve Cuba to make it a stronger nation so that it could stand on its own and wouldn't be taken over by another imperialistic power. So the U.S. stayed around with our military. We improved the sanitation to get rid of the mosquitoes and the cesspools that were there, built schools, built roads, established government institutions for them to have a stabilized economy. despite all these good things, many Cubans felt that they weren't able to enact their own government and do it on their own. They felt this was violating the Teller Amendment. And so what will result is the Platt Amendment, that the U.S. government at this time says, okay, we're going to get out of Cuba. But in order to protect you, you must provide us a naval base. This is what leads to the U.S. having control of Guantanamo Bay. It also says the U.S. troops were allowed to intervene in Cuba to keep Cuba independent. And Cuba had to protect American businesses and all the improvements we had it done there. So according to the Platt Amendment, it seems like Cuba's independent, but it really isn't. The U.S. basically makes Cuba a protectorate, that the U.S. will get involved in Cuba, and this will set up our relationships with them that will lead to devastation in the 1960s and the foundation for Fidel Castro taking over. Okay, so the results of the Spanish-American War. The U.S. now realized that we're a colonial power. We have colonies in the Pacific. We need a navy. And to go around South America is going to take a long time, so we need a canal to speed up that. The U.S. realized the weakness of its army. Many of the scars of the Civil War were erased because our northern and southern soldiers fought together. Spain lost part of its empire, and the U.S. ended isolationism and became an international power. We're going to see at this time the U.S. was recognized as world power. We are going to replace Great Britain in the Western Hemisphere as the dominant. We're going to become active in Asia. And we're going to eliminate some diseases. This is done by Walter Reed. He goes into Cuba and annihilates a lot of cesspools. He will later go into Panama. The other thing that happens at this time is many people see our involvement in different parts of the world. And they were like, whoa, wait, why are we going to other places and trying to help those people when there are people here in America, such as labor unions, such as farmers, such as immigrants who need help? And these anti-imperialists are saying, let's not go into other places. Let's stay here in America, improve our lot versus going elsewhere. And so some of these people, Carnegie, y'all see Mark Twain there. We're going to see William Jennings Bryan are going to be part of this anti-imperialist league. So our biggest problem is going to deal with the Philippines. So you have some readings that we're going to focus on. I'm going to stop the video here so it's easier for me to upload and we have a stopping point. So Ms. Morgan should pass out those documents. We're going to start on a little bit of the documents today and finish up most of them on Friday.